You're watching BCTV, Brantford's community access station.
This is BCTV, Brantford Government Television, a service of Brantford Community Television.
Good morning. I am Elise Lowe, convener and voter service chair of the League of Women Voters of the East Shore. We are the co-host for today's event. Welcome to Your Vote, a forum to discuss efforts being made to improve voting and election laws and procedures, both here and around the country. Many of you are probably concerned about voter suppression, redistricting, and gerrymandering, all cause the disenfranchisement of U.S. citizens in their governmental process. But have you ever considered the Washington, D.C. residents, nearly 700,000 people who have no senator or voting representative in Congress, and whose local government is reviewed and overseen by Congress? Wyoming and Vermont have smaller populations than D.C., but they each have 2 senators and 1 representative in Congress, obviously because they are states. So in 2016, the residents of D.C. voted 86% in favor of petitioning Congress for statehood for the non-federal area of the city. Other routes to achieving democracy for D.C. have failed in the past, and amending the Constitution is not necessary to become a state. Admission acts, as they're called, were introduced and are active in the House with 136 co-sponsors, and the Senate with 19 co-sponsors, where they continue to gain support for D.C. statehood. The League of Women Voters has promoted self-determination and full congressional representation for the D.C. residents since 1938. And now we're seeking to support the Washington, D.C. local League of Women Voters with petitions that have been circulated throughout the U.S. via the local leagues. I ask that each of you please consider adding your name to the petitions on our table in the back of the room, where we also have background materials for more information on this topic. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Joan Means from Connecticut Shoreline Indivisible, our partner for today's forum.
Good morning. My name is Joan Means, and I am a member of Connecticut Shoreline Indivisible, based mostly out of Guilford, but along the shoreline as well. I'd like to welcome you to our event today, co-hosted with the League of Women Voters. This event, as you know, is to address your vote and issues of concern that we've all had following the 2016 election, which we now know foreign governments attempted to interfere with U.S. state electoral systems across the country, and Connecticut was one of the states identified as having been targeted by a foreign country during those elections. The Commissioner of Elections for Connecticut, the Secretary of State, is charged with administering, interpreting, and implementing election laws and ensuring fair and impartial elections in our state. Denis Morrow was first elected as Connecticut's Secretary of State in 2010 and re-elected in 2014. As Connecticut's Chief Elections Officer, Secretary Morrow has supported and expanded democratic participation, ensuring that every citizen's rights and privileges are protected and that every vote is counted accurately. Secretary Morrow has worked to expand voter participation through Election Day and online voter registration. She has also improved Connecticut's democratic accountability and integrity with a series of rapid response processes to Election Day problems. She was elected president of the National Association of Secretaries of State for the 2016-17 term and serves on the Board of Advisors to the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. We've invited Secretary Merrill to speak with us today on a variety of issues related to our votes. The topics we asked her to talk with us about include: how is our vote and personal information being threatened, and by whom? How specifically is our vote and information being protected? What mechanisms are now in place? What more needs to be done? And is an amendment to the state constitution needed? Following Secretary Merrill's remarks, we will have a short Q&A, but I would like you now to please join me in welcoming Secretary of State Denis Morrow to speak with us.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for coming out on, yes, you're right, a great gardening day. I'm a big gardener. Oh, well, next year. So, well, first of all, I want to say how great it is to be back with the League of Women Voters. As some of you know, and I see a lot of old friends in the audience, I was on the state board of the League as the voter service chair, I think in the late 80s, early 90s, just before I was elected to my first term in office. I did serve 17 years in the General Assembly, beginning in 1994 in a special election. I come from Storrs, Connecticut, a little place called Yukon up there. It's my hometown. In that time, I did serve in a number of capacities. I was chair of the Appropriations Committee, co-chair with Tony Harp, actually, back when we had money. I still remember the year I was co-chair, the budget, we had a $1 billion surplus. People have forgotten how fast and quickly these things change, and they do change back, so take heart. It's probably cyclical, we hope. And then I was elected by my colleagues as majority leader of my party for the years 2008 to 2010. I want to say I'm only the second woman who has ever reached a position of leadership in the House. I like to say in 350 years. It's kind of correct. And a lot of times, a lot of other women, particularly other women legislators, always ask me, how did you do that? And that's a very long story. But I ran a lot of elections for other people. And I always like to point out, just at the outset, that people talk about leadership and you're a great leader, and that means you must have wonderful ideas. That's actually not true. Most of the good ideas I ever got were from my constituents, by the way, first of all. But it's really a lot more about listening to other people, almost a forgotten art these days. And I think that really is why I was elected majority leader those couple of years. And then I chose to run for Secretary of the State. It's actually the job of my dreams. I always wanted to be Secretary of the State. And I actually have proof. I went to a leadership conference when I was like a very new legislator. And they had us write our political epitaph, which meant, where do you want to end up? Now, naturally, there were plenty of people in the audience who had big aspirations. They wanted to be governors and senators and president even. Some of them, we were kind of young. But I wrote down, I want to be Secretary of the State. And they had us all put it away for 10 years. And sure enough, 10 years later, I opened it up and it was still there. So it's true. Because these were the issues I really cared about even then. And I think I got a lot of that from the League, honestly. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I think you have to start, when you start talking about voter rights and what's going on with voting, you have to start from a premise. And I start from the premise that we are all better off if everyone's participating. That democracy thrives when everyone's at the table. And that means everyone who's 18 and a citizen should be part of voting and expressing their opinions and their voices. And anything we can do to encourage that, because you do have to invite people in, especially young people, new voters, new immigrants. those people, I just came from a naturalization ceremony yesterday, and that is one of the most inspiring things that I do as part of my job. When you welcome people who have studied our Constitution, our way of life, and are here because they want more opportunity for themselves and their families. And when they swear in as citizens, new citizens, it's so touching. And the first thing I have them do, I have a table in the back of the room, and I say, there's a table in the back of the room. The greatest right you have just been given is the right to vote for your leaders. And so they all go back and register to vote. It's a wonderful thing. So starting from that premise, and also recognizing that, like this morning we woke up and they're bombing Syria. I mean, it's a very stressful time in American history. And I say that as someone who's been involved in public life since Vietnam, you know, which was the inspiration for my generation to get involved. The good news is I think we're seeing another wave of that out there, and some of you are the result of that. That is incredibly hopeful for me, that people are suddenly realizing, you know, use it or lose it. We've got to get involved. Everyone has to be involved, not just a few. So, which brings me to the whole issue of what's going on with voting rights in this country, which I thought, frankly, was a settled question after the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Not so much. It's obviously who votes and where and how has always been an issue in American history, more or less in certain times. But honestly, it's been pretty quiet since 1965 until about 2008, when all of a sudden you had a wave of concern about fraudulent voting. I guess I'd call it, just as an overarching theme. This came as a surprise to me as a new Secretary of State in 2010 when I went to my first national meeting and I joined the Voter Participation Committee thinking, this is great, this is just what I'm wanting to work on, and I'm going to get all these great new ideas. And instead, what I got was one of the Secretaries of State, a man called Chris Kobach, who is the Secretary of State of Kansas, who has since become quite notorious, stood up and started talking about how he had rooted out voter fraud in Kansas and that there were all these illegals voting and non-citizens voting. And I was so shocked, I said, I think kind of in a sotto voce, as they say, I thought we were here to get more people voting. And everyone sort of laughed, but it really wasn't funny. It was very serious. And by the time we finished the presentation, it came out that he had found, I don't know, 6 people or something who had, you know, where they had actually, when you pin him down, that they had actually been able to get any kind of evidence that it was true. But outside was C-SPAN and other media, and this, you know, he was riding this wave of concern. Honestly, though, since that time, that concern seems to be waning as we realize what the real threat to democracy is, and it's not fraudulent voting, frankly. That's been pretty much debunked. But it really is a wave of concern about now we have, you know, foreign countries trying to influence our elections. And yes, it's true. And I'll get to that in a minute. And the other thing that we have is a wave of efforts to purge lists. This will be the new effort as people try to, frankly, manipulate the list of who can vote to, you know, favor their team, whatever it is. And here's where I have to say, I've been in politics now for 25 years in Connecticut, running for office. I've seen such a dramatic change in the way politics is handled at the state level even now. It was, before we used to talk about how Washington was so stuck and people were so partisan. It was not true in Connecticut when I came into office in 1993. Right through about the early 2000s, we were very collegial. You know, we didn't agree, but we went out to dinner together, we went out for drinks at the local watering holes, and that's where you got to know people and talk about issues. That doesn't happen anymore, from what I hear. I'm kind of on the sidelines now from all this, and that's a very sad thing. And I think that has contributed to the problems we're having, where we don't seem to be able to agree on the problems, much less the solutions. So in that atmosphere, I think you have to look at this as it's almost played like team sports now, and that each side is trying to get advantages for themselves. Now, it's always been true in politics, right? You know, right back to Tammany Hall and all kinds of other ways people have found to get voters to vote for their party. This is something beyond that, I think. It relates to a wave of bigotry, honestly, and racism that is pervasive now in our country as we seek to figure out why the global economy is making such a difference in our country. And a lot of this has been targeted at people that, you know, everyone's suspicious about who's voting and are they really citizens and are the Russians attacking our vote. So suddenly we're under a microscope. And I know that there are some registrars here in the room. Can you raise your hands? I met you earlier. There they are, from Brantford and Guilford. Thank you. Oh, someone else. Thank you very much for being here, by the way. So these are the folks who really are the election officials in our country. They are the front lines. They are the ones that are executing the laws on elections. So they will be very familiar with some of these issues, but not so much in Connecticut because, frankly, I'm not going to let that happen on my watch. I have really fought off quite a few efforts to change our voting laws in Connecticut as well, especially when it came to things like increasing our photo ID laws, which, by the way, we have an ID law in Connecticut, right? Anyone who's voted knows when you go into the polls, they ask you for your ID. Now, recently, some people have been kind of outraged by that, and I remember it because when it went in, it was like 20 years ago. We had one of the earlier ID requirements, and at that time, I can still remember people coming in and saying, you know, Marge, you've known me for 30 years. Why are you asking me for my ID? This is ridiculous, you know. So people here, oh, I got it upset. It's okay. So, oh. I thought it was the microphone. Something else. Oh, that's right, Firehouse. So anyway, we do have, I think, a very effective ID law. I think there's no problem. You know, we need to know who's voting. But what we have is, in our law is flexibility. So even if you forgot your wallet at home or whatever, we still let you vote. You sign an affidavit or whatever, you know, whatever system. And we have a flexibility in terms of which kinds of IDs you can use. The difference between that and what was happening nationally was you had places like Texas passing a photo ID law that said you can use your photo ID if it's a gun license, but not your student photo ID. Pretty pointed. So that's why, though, you have not seen that in Connecticut, because I like to think we're a little more civilized about this, and we do enforce, you know, rigorous laws that are very effective, but also flexible enough to allow everyone to vote. We are not trying to stop people from voting. We're trying to get more people voting. And honestly, the biggest problem in elections today is that not enough people are voting. We have one of the most scandalously low rates of voting in the developed world. Hopefully, that may change, because now it feels like the electorate is awakening to some of the things that happen when you do not elect the leaders that you would wish for. So, let's talk about what the real threats are today. That, to me, is not a threat. I am not feeling like there's all these people trying to vote fraudulently. I am much more concerned that not enough people are voting and that they feel disenfranchised. They feel their vote doesn't count. And that's what I'd like to change. So, and I will say, the other thing we need to pay attention to is the new generation of voters. I am most proud of the bill I helped pass in 2003, which requires a course in civics before you graduate from high school in Connecticut. Thank you. You know, it was amazing to people, actually, that it wasn't required, but it had kind of slid out of the curriculum because it's not on the test. And that is sad, because the most important job of public education is to develop citizens of the country and the world. But that's so hopefully now it's in place. I'm actually, frankly, more concerned about elementary school, where it's really not taught, where we used to teach history by telling stories and that sort of thing. not happening because they're too busy with the testing material and the things, the skill-based curriculum we seem to be moving toward. But that's my old teacher in me. I'm upset about that. I just was at the the Council for Social Studies last night giving out awards to these wonderful teachers. That, to me, is God's work. They've got the future generation in their hands. Anyway, so education of the public is critically needed right now, I think, on things like what's going on with the voting system. And so let me just talk a little bit about the issue that's on most people's minds, which is, did the Russians hack our elections? What does that mean? And what are we doing about it? So I was informed in the fall last year, a full year after the election, that Connecticut was one of 21 states that had been, I think hacked is the wrong word, honestly, scanned. The only thing on the internet that's at all electronic is our voter file. In other words, the state keeps the voter file for the state, and it's an electronic list. So when you register, you go on the electronic list. It's actually kept by the local towns. Nothing we do in elections is statewide, really. It's all done by 169 towns, 2 registrars and a clerk, and they're all involved, and it's all maintained really at the local level, but through our state system. So what happened was exactly that IP addresses from Russian agencies, literally, were identified as scans coming in. So just so you get an idea, the state keeps this big file, along with several other very large state databases. My office keeps 2 of them. The business registry, 360,000 businesses register with us, so we keep that database. And the voter file, 2 million voters, and all their information. And then, of course, you have the DMV, the state police, and others. We get approximately 1 million scans a day on our systems. So just to give you an idea. So it is a bit like finding a needle in a haystack. Now, this traffic that's coming in, and basically I'd liken it to rattling the door, knocking on the window, trying to get in. It's just like you're finding out that all others are doing to your own computers, and that's why you have firewalls and stuff. Well, it's the same thing with the state. So we have firewalls and various products that keep these things out and try to identify the bad guys versus the ones you want in. And, you know, if you know your own computer, you know that sometimes things get in and they're really spam and you have to identify it as spam. Well, it's like a super version of that. So we were apparently the state also has the capacity to recognize some of this, but we were told by the intelligence agencies nationally that track this sort of thing that we had been scanned. And so they didn't get in. As far as we know, nothing happened, but not to say it can't happen next time, because it's never going to be the same thing twice. This is our concern. Our concern is not as great as you might read in the paper, because that's the only part of our election system that is electronic, really. The machines that tally your vote are scanners. They're old-fashioned, really. We have a paper ballot. You vote on paper, you stick it in the machine, it records your vote. We keep the paper, and we audit afterwards to make sure it all matches up. The little cards that are in the machine that do the tallying are checked before and after by the University of Connecticut. We have, fortunately for us, one of 3 voting centers in the country in the computer science department of UConn. And they test all our machinery, these little cards. They'll test the ballots, make sure they're all lined up correctly and all that sort of thing. And they also give us advice on things like new equipment. Right now, one of the things we were looking at are, if you ever wonder why we're still checking people in on paper with pencil and crossing off their names. And so there are these things called electronic poll books, which we were very interested in purchasing for the state. And they would check you in on a laptop, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it, except it can be attached to the internet, and one person out of those 169 towns attaches it to the internet, you've corrupted your whole file. So that's why, at this point, the University of Connecticut our voter center recommended against purchasing them at this time. So those are the kinds of things we're doing to ensure that our system, such as it is, even though it's not very electronic, does have vulnerabilities. The biggest vulnerability is that the voter file, when it's all, it has the state server where it sits, but every one of the towns has one drop point. And each one of those has a router that could be insecure. So every time you have a place someone can get in, you've got a vulnerability. So these are the kinds of things that we're going to have to keep looking at. We have to work with the towns and the local registrars to make sure everyone's got the training on all this. But this is all new for us. We're used to being kind of this quiet thing behind the scenes where, we do all this and we're very, very transparent. That's part of being in elections. We want the public to know every step of the way what we're doing because we want to maintain the trust of the public in elections. That is the most critical point. And sadly, I think the saddest fallout of all this is that we have now created, the Russians have now created distrust in the American public in their elections. For the first time that I can remember. I really feel that Americans have almost a touching trust in their elections. And suddenly now everyone wants to know, how do you do it? Oh, thank God we have a paper ballot. It's great that people are paying attention now, and I've been heartened by the fact that everywhere I go, people seem to be reading about this and care about it. But it's also my job to make you understand that while there's a threat, there are really lots of ways we mitigate that threat already. We've been doing this for hundreds of years. There are checks and balances at every point in the system. And the fact that it's all done locally turns out to be a great blessing when you come to something like electronic voting and all that sort of thing, because it's difficult to imagine hacking the 10,000 polling places we have in the country, the jurisdictions. There's 10,000 jurisdictions. There's probably hundreds of thousands of polling places. We have 800 and some odd here in Connecticut. So imagine trying to somehow tamper with any of that. It's really difficult to imagine. But the voter file is vulnerable. And it's also vulnerable in another way. And so now I can talk a little bit about the bills that I have this session. And one of them is about voter privacy. Because just lately, with all this, it's come to everybody's attention that their name and address and birth date and voting history are all open to the public. And now, because we're no longer just keeping them on little card files, you can purchase the voter file for $400 in Connecticut. And one man, at least, has taken advantage of that and bought the voter file, put it up on the internet, a fellow from New Hampshire, actually, and said, do you know the government is, not the government, the Secretary of State is selling your data? It's an outrage. For $5, you can get your name off this horrible list. So that's what started it a couple of years ago. I got hundreds of calls from my office, outraged that I'm selling their data, and how do I get off this list? And then the registrars started hearing with the latest with the Trump Commission, which is another whole story. Yeah, I'll talk about that too. That now we have a new wave of people coming into the registrars' offices and saying, I want my name off this list. Well, that's tragic. That's moving in the wrong direction, because it means then they won't be able to vote unless they re-register, which they could do. But anyway, that is some of what's happening out there. So that led me to really look at what we're doing. Now, obviously, the list must be public. We must know who's voting, who's eligible to vote, and so forth. And also under our Freedom of Information law, any list that's kept or any information that's kept on you by the government is subject to freedom of information. It must be revealed publicly. So here you have this balancing act that we have to draw a line somewhere about what's public and what isn't. When we first ask you to register, you do give the last 4 digits of your Social Security, for example. We do not include that in the public data. So we've already kind of eliminated that. I think we should do one more thing, and that is eliminate the birth date from the private information that we put on the voter file. And that's because if someone has your birth date and your name, they can steal your identity. Those two pieces of information are the important ones. Birth date, exact date, is the most important because it's the one thing that can't change about you. Your name can change, your address can change, lots of things can change. Your birth date is immutable. So my proposal is to, but you still kind of need enough information to identify someone. So my proposal is just reveal the birth year, which would be able to see, whether you're a senior citizen, for example, or a new voter and so forth, but not your exact birth date. That bill, I think it's here. Well, I can give you the number. I think it's on the sheet. Has passed out of the GAE committee, not exactly as I wanted it. I also wanted to include that file could not be used for commercial purposes, which I would argue is what the fellow in New Hampshire was doing. Because when a voter registers, they shouldn't have to be worried that that information is going to be used for something besides voting. That part was not approved, so the only thing in the bill now is the birth date would be removed. It passed unanimously out of the committee and probably will go to the floor if we get anything done this year, which I very much doubt. Well, sorry, I'm feeling cynical today about what's going on up there. So that's one bill. The other bill that I'm trying again is the bill that would provide early voting in Connecticut. I have been trying for many years now to get some version of this passed in Connecticut. Everyone asks me, all the other states, they're voting on different days. They're voting by mail in Oregon and Washington and Colorado. They're voting by county. They're voting all these different ways. Why can't we do that? Why aren't you fixing that? Which breaks my heart because we did actually get a measure on the ballot, you may remember, in 2014. It failed. I don't know why exactly. It didn't fail by too much, but I think it was a confusingly worded bill that year, and I didn't word it, so not my fault. That bill would have just eliminated the restrictive language in our state constitution, which is the culprit here. Our state constitution has a provision that says you can only vote on Tuesday, and you can only get an absentee ballot for a list of reasons. And changing the state constitution is daunting. It takes several years. It has to be voted on by 2 different legislators. Then it goes on the ballot to get approved, and then it has to go into statute. So we're starting over with a more limited version, trying to address the concerns that we heard about the more broad version, which would have allowed no-fault absentee balloting, for example. Anybody would be able to get an absentee ballot anytime they wanted. I personally support that. But I heard complaints about that for various reasons. So now the proposal is we would have 3 to 5 days of early voting, besides just Tuesday, and it would be within the 2 weeks before election. And the reason it's not specific is because I'm trying to get specific language out of the state constitution. It really belongs in statute where you can change it from time to time, as we're trying to do now. So the legislature would then decide whether it would be, I don't know, Saturday, Sunday, and Tuesday, or 5 days or 3 days. It would have to be at least 8 hours every one of those days. But so that's some liberalization. We said just 2 weeks out because the year we proposed it before, we've proposed this for several years, and it passed in the House. It never got called in the Senate. So I don't know where it's headed this year. It has gone out of committee, although it was on a very split vote, totally party line vote this year. This is an issue that has become mysteriously to me partisan over the years. I'm not sure why, because when it originally passed in the 38 other states that are already doing this, it was mostly unanimous and supported by both parties. But like many other things, I think a certain mythology has grown up around this as to which party it advantages. So I think the Republicans feel that days of early voting advantages Democrats, and Democrats think that no-fault absentee balloting benefits Republicans. I don't think either of those things are true, quite frankly. I think what we're trying to do is just provide more opportunities for everyone to vote. So I'm pretty hopeful. I do think I have a number of Republican senators who are interested in voting for it, whether they can bring themselves to do it. One of them is Senator Fasano, actually. He's been pretty supportive, as has Senator Witkos, who is the deputy minority leader in the Senate. So I'm hopeful. But that's, again, my theory is the more opportunities that we can give people to vote, the more we should do. And it's within reason. It's not going to cost much more, if anything. You don't have to open all the polling places. And there's lots of models to look at across the country, which probably some of you have seen. So those are the ways currently I'm trying to respond to what I see as the issues right now. The Presidential Commission that was formed by President Trump shortly after his election in 2016 on the theory that 3 to 5 million people voted illegally was the statement he made because he was trying to explain the fact that the person with the most votes didn't actually win. And that goes to the whole electoral college situation and national popular vote, which I can talk about a little bit. But the commission immediately called and asked us for all our voter files in the whole country and wanted to put them all in one place that was not open to the public. And their ostensible reason was to make sure there weren't people listed in 2 places, and that if they were, they'd be taken off the rolls. This would contravene all current federal law, where we're really, really careful before we take someone off the voter roll. Anyway, it went down under incredible pressure. They were sued by everyone from the ACLU to groups concerned about not following the federal law, that this should all be open to the public. So that has gone away, but it has left the residue of people in the state saying to me, I was the first one, as president of the association, I got Republicans and Democrats all signed off on a resolution saying, no, we're not going to do this. So the entire community of secretaries of state rose up and said, we're not going to do it. And I was the first one to say, I'm not going to do it. Thank you. Terrible effort. So that's gone, but it is now shifted to the Department of Homeland Security, so that doesn't give me any greater feeling about it all. But I think we're fighting back in the right ways. Yesterday, Senator Blumenthal and I announced that the state will be getting $5 million, 5.1 to be exact, from the federal government, because this is the one item that everybody seemed to agree on in Washington. We've got to do something to beef up our security of our elections, reassure the American public we're on the job. And I have to tell you, in Connecticut, we're on the job. We've got training for all registrars that's coming right up. We're going to make sure everybody knows how to do this, how we keep things secure. And by the way, we have risen from, I think we were ranked by the Pew Foundation as like 19th in the country for our election procedures. We're now number 5. Pretty good, all right? And I think the only thing I would do to increase what we're already doing is I think I would do more auditing after the fact. I think we could increase our audit process. But other than that, really, Connecticut's using... Oh, yeah, I know you guys don't want that. That's too bad. Sorry. No, we would do it. Don't worry. Towns don't have to pay for it. I got a plan. They don't call us the land of steady habits for nothing. But honestly, I really do feel Connecticut is a leader in this area, and I plan to keep us there. And I hope I know this group follows this pretty avidly. I have to say again, compliments to the League. All these years, you are the people that keep us, moving in the right direction. You're up there lobbying for the right things, the Citizens Election Program, which I guess we're going to hear about in a minute. National popular vote is another big issue where, the gerrymandering situations. There's lots of things to work on to save our democracy. But as they say, democracy dies in darkness. And the biggest thing we can all do is educate everyone else. Thanks very much.
The first quick question is, what is your position on national popular vote?
Oh, I support it and testified for it, and I know there's a lot of activity. I think it's just a simple premise. The person with the most votes should win. It does presuppose that every other state has as good an election process as we do, because then you do become very dependent on all those other states as well. I do think states have a perfect right to allocate their electoral votes wherever they wish. And so this falls, I think, under that policy. And I just think it's just much more explicable. And I don't think the Electoral College is operating the way it was intended to begin with anyway. And there's a long history behind that. But in general, I definitely support it. And I think it may pass this year. That may be the one thing the General Assembly actually does.
That was the next question.
Oh.
What's the prospect for this passing?
I think it's pretty good. I mean, it's better than it has been in the past, although, you know, with this budget impasse and all the other impasses going on, I'm not sure exactly, you know, if they can muster the support. You know, the real problem is that the General Assembly is so evenly divided now that unless you get every single Democrat to vote for whatever the majority is doing, and you have to get at least one Republican vote. And I don't know, you know, in the Senate, it's 18-18. And on a vote like this, I don't think the lieutenant governor can break the tie, which is true on early voting, too, because it's a constitutional amendment. So I think it's better than it has been. I don't know, we'll see.
Is there any move in the legislature to make Election Day a holiday?
Oh, that's my favorite topic. God, I would love that. Although I don't think we could get away with another holiday. So we'd just have to move Election Day. And for me, it would be either July 4th. You know, I know everybody's on vacation, but come on, it's July 4th. We're already celebrating democracy, right? Make a lot of sense to me. Or Veterans Day. It's a week later. You know, and what better way to celebrate veterans? So, yeah, I would totally support that. But the problem is it's federal. So, you know, because every election has some sort of federal candidate involved, so it has to be national. There is a group you can join, though, called Why Tuesday.
We have a budding lobbyist in the crowd. They want to know the actual bill numbers of what you've proposed.
Sure.
I have some down there, too.
Oh,
Okay.
let's see. The voter privacy protection bill is House Bill 5173, and where's early voting? I don't see it here. Oh, wait, here it is at the top. Yeah, HJ 28, resolution proposing a state constitutional amendment to permit early voting. If you're interested, the compact is House Bill 5421. That's the National Popular Vote bill. There's some others here I know the League is interested in, is protecting the Citizens Election Program, which, yes, I also support. And House Bill 5526, dark money and disclosure, desperately needed. And House Bill 5522, an act restoring the Citizens Election Program, and some other items in there. Again, a very important bill. You know, the Citizens Election Program was the signal accomplishment, in my view, of the 1990s in this state. We are the only state that has ever passed a public financing bill willingly, sort of. I mean, it was the result of a scandal, we all know, but it was an incredible accomplishment, and I'm very unhappy with what's been happening to it because it's been chipped away over the years, and I hope we can restore it.
If not a holiday, should schools be closed on Election Day?
Yes, simply because it's just, we cannot, with the current situation with security in schools, it's much too difficult to hold elections in schools when school's in session. Many districts now are closed on Election Day, and I think they all should be, honestly. So I mean, have it be a teacher day or something like that, but, and it is not realistic to think we can hold elections in buildings other than schools. They are frequently the most equipped place to do it. You have to have parking, you have to have handicap access, all those things. So I don't think it's practical to think that we can have elections without holding them in the schools. I'm personally sad that we can't have school on Election Day because I thought it was wonderful for the kids and parents to see the elections going on. But sadly, this is another fallout from the school security issue.
Back to civics education in high school. Somebody really wants to know how it's done and whether voter registration forms and candidate platforms information are given to the classes. If not, is that something we could petition for?
Yeah.
I'm actually a high school student, so I could probably answer that question.
Oh, which high school do you go to?
I go to Guilford High School, so not too far from
Each high school
Guilford.
is different. Please
Yeah,
remember that.
that's what I was about to say. Yeah, go ahead.
So the civics course in Guilford High School generally talks about the Connecticut state legislature, our state government, and that general kind of way of how that system of the government operates. To my knowledge, there was never a time when they would offer voter registration forms in civics class, because if I were to assume, the thinking would be that the school generally offers that in a later date. And the school also kind of has a policy of like not wanting to seem political in a way and like trying to influence students and such. But from my own personal experience, but I am just someone who really likes politics, I would say that I don't think the civics education is up to snuff, if not more engaging, because I believe if civics students were in courtrooms or here or going to the Capitol and really learning about and seeing a governmental process in action, I think that would engage them more than reading about it in a textbook and doing work and such.
Very good points, all of them. I would just say it is a requirement that the registrars go into the schools every year in May to register students. It's more or less successful depending on the attitude, shall I say, of the school. Some of them allow the registrars to go into the classrooms and actually speak with students and so forth. And some actually have tried to ban them from coming in. So we've had to do a lot of work on that, actually statewide. But now we're getting more cooperation recently. So, oh, and I want to comment on, the learning by doing. I actually ran a little project called the Law and Citizenship Education Project for many years in the 80s. And that was our whole thing. You can't teach civics out of a book, with the little bill hopping through the boxes. It's just not really true. We really encourage teachers to do community learning. This is an area where learning by doing really works. You're absolutely right. I'm sorry to hear that it's not being done as much as it should. We're still working on it, but every town is different. We're not a mandated state, as they call them in education. So each teacher almost is on their own in terms of what they do. So.
Someone would like to know how the absentee balloting is voted. They ask, why not have voting machines in town halls or registrar's office exclusively for absentee ballot?
Well, we could do absentee ballot a lot of different ways if we had our druthers. I would do, but right now, as it is, clerks do the absentee ballots, and the registrars kind of do everything else, the way I get it. And this is lost in the mists of time as to why that was true. I think originally registrars were smaller offices in a way, and all they did was register people, and the clerks did everything else. And then somewhere along the way, I think the registrars became a more developed office, and the clerks probably quite willingly gave some of the work over to the registrars. But as it is now, registrars, because they're there more, I think, in many of the small towns in particular, registrars only come in sometimes once a week, sometimes even once a month in some of the very small towns. So the clerks that receive the absentee ballots, you have to say that you are going to be out of the jurisdiction all hours of the polling day. And then you can get an absentee ballot. You can apply for an absentee ballot, and I'm sure the registrars in the room would be happy to tell you exactly how all that works. But, you know, you can get an application, you send the application back, then they send you a ballot. It's put in a double envelope so that no one, you know, protects the privacy of your vote, and it's all counted on Election Day. But the limitation is the restrictions in the state constitution as to who gets to get one. You can only get it if you're unable to get to the polls. We do have one provision in Connecticut. You can get on a permanent AB list if you are permanently disabled in some way. We do maintain that list. I think that answers the
information is
question.
on the back table.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of election pamphlets on the back table. Please look there. You may have a neighbor or a relative who needs to have that kind of information. If the legislature passes the ballot question, how will that be publicized?
I am restricted in my office, which may be the problem that happened in 2014. First of all, I have absolutely no money for something like that, but we are restricted from lobbying for bills, pro or con, in my office. So it would have to be done by an outside group like the League or others who are interested in these things. Common Cause has sometimes done that. But it really does need a lobbying effort, should we get to that point. And I can talk to people about how we could get that done, but that was what happened in 2014. There was just no effort behind it. There was no advertising about it. And I think people just didn't know it was there. So I'm open to suggestion and happy to help.
Okay. How likely is it that this undemocratic system of gerrymandering, I think they mean the way
Yep.
the districts are drawn in Connecticut, might change?
Probably not at all, because believe it or not, our system isn't the worst around. At least both parties are at the table. So for those of you who don't know how it works, every 10 years, based on the census, there's a committee formed. The committee is made up of the leadership of the House and Senate, and there's a tiebreaker person. So I think it's a 9-person board. And they get together and decide what the district lines are. The reason this has become so much more directed and gerrymandered is because of computers. You can now gerrymander a district down to the house. And these systems are becoming what they call predictive, so you can even predict how someone in a certain household is going to vote in a few years. So as parties have availed themselves of this technology, it's become more and more compacted, I guess I'd say. And so the problem with the system is the people who most benefit from it are the ones doing the work. Now, it can be even worse than that. You keep hearing about Wisconsin. The reason it's worse in Wisconsin is because the majority party, whoever it is, doesn't even have to let the other party in the room. That's how they got where they are. So we're not that bad. That being said, I do think it is not appropriate that the people who benefit from the redistricting are the ones creating the districts. But, yeah, of course, but let me tell you, how is that going to change when they're the ones voting on the process? It would almost take what happened to us when we passed the Citizens Election Program, a great scandal. And then suddenly, we finally got some action on public financing. But that's the only way I see it changing, honestly.
Last question. What % of eligible voters actually voted in 2016, federal and Connecticut?
I know that in Connecticut, we had a pretty good, very good, very high voter turnout, but it is a percentage of a much higher number. We have actually now 150,000 more voters in Connecticut than we've ever had before. I think some of that is a result of some of the ease with which you can now register at DMV, for example. We're getting literally hundreds of thousands of people registering and correcting their registrations through DMV. So the figure I remember from eligible voters in 2016 is 76%. It's very high, yeah. It's a bit higher than national, as I recall, but still not as good as places like Oregon, which was like 90%. Minnesota is typically the highest voter turnout, but they have a much more homogeneous population than we do. You know, a lot of the voting turnout, you look at the numbers. I did something called the Civic Health Index in the state. I've done 2 reports now. They're on my website. And they give you a lot of that detail about who voted, how many people voted, and the gap is exactly as you would expect it to be between lower income, higher income people, whites, African Americans, Latinos. The lowest voting group is Latino. It's fascinating, really, because Connecticut's population, the large majority of the Latino population is Puerto Rican, and they are eligible to vote. So you don't get all those problems with, oh, are they legal or not, because they're eligible to vote. So 60% of the Latino population, now these are approximate because it's very difficult to really get exact numbers. 60% are Puerto Rican. 50%, we believe, about 50% of the Latino population is registered to vote. Of those, about 23% actually vote. That's a very low number. And as you would anticipate, you know, the typical gap in Connecticut, it's striking. Again, it's the old achievement gap. It's every gap you've ever heard about in Connecticut. It's stark. So, and it's no different in elections. Okay.
Now we'll switch gears and talk about the campaign finance, the public financing program that is special here in Connecticut, called the Citizens Election Program. Let me introduce Ilona Vashnis from the League of Women Voters of Connecticut. She chairs our special project from the State League called CE Proud. Ilona.
Thank you very much. I am really thrilled to be here because I like to be able to, because I know that a lot of you will come out knowing something that you didn't know before. And it's not that men can be members of the League of Women Voters. It's something else. Because I met a man here, and I accosted him, and I said, "Let me tell you something you don't know." And he was sort of startled and looking at me, and I said, "Did you know that men can be members of the League of Women Voters?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm a member." Okay, so, but I know, and I'll tell you later how I know that a lot of you will not have known what I will tell you. And therefore, I'm thrilled to be here because you leave this room saying, "I didn't know." And then you'll go and ask your neighbors, "Did you know?" And they'll say, "No, I didn't know." And I will give you some information which will make you capable of answering all of their questions. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the about the Citizens Election Program. CE Proud. What is it? People keep hearing it. Now we're also reading it in the papers because it says that some members or some candidates for governor have already qualified for CEP money. And so it's out there. Most people have no idea what it is. Okay, what it is. It is a grant distributing program in Connecticut. It is in our state. You can run for any state office. That's House or Senate, or the 6 position officers. You can get money to run your election campaigns. Public money. And all you need, in other words, all of a sudden, people who don't have rich friends, who can't reach outside the state to pull in big money, those people have a chance to run for any of the state offices. All you need to do is to have a commitment to go out and talk with the people, because in order to get the money, the grant money, you have to qualify. And you qualify by showing that you're a viable candidate. And you show it by getting many people to give you small donations. For example, between $5 and $100 for offices like governor and secretary of the state and so on. And between $5 and $250 to get the big money to run your election for the House or Senate. What is also interesting is that the money has to be from individuals, from people. Cannot be from a business, cannot be from a corporation, cannot be from a PAC. In other words, you are forced, okay, the qualifying, how much do you have to raise to qualify to run for the House Senate, the House seat? $5,000. Now, in the olden days, you would ask 5 friends to give you $1,000 each, or 10 friends and so on, you're all set. You didn't even need to meet with people. Now, because you have to raise, the top amount is $200, $250 for the House or the Senate, you have to meet a lot of people. I mean, those who wrote this program were geniuses. They say, force the candidates to meet the people, get the people a chance to take a look at the candidates. Wonderful. So, okay, so it's $5,000 to run for the House, $15,000 to run for the Senate. That is a lot of people you have to meet, because the top amount is $250. Okay, now there are 6, and let me tell you, about 80% of the current House and Senate have run on CEP money. A lot of people have used it. Okay, now we have 6 state officers, and that's the governor, the lieutenant governor, the secretary of the state, the treasurer, the comptroller, and the attorney general. All right. How much do they have to? Now, their top is $100. The lieutenant governor, secretary of the state, treasurer, comptroller, and attorney general, they have to raise $75,000. That's their qualifying. They have to be out there meeting a lot of people, a lot of people. The governor has to raise $250,000 in not more than $100 amounts. They have to meet a lot of people. Now, what is also interesting, and again, it was geniuses who devised this. The House and Senate people, most of their qualifying money has to be raised in the district they will represent. And the others, the six officers, most of it has to be in Connecticut. For example, the governor has to raise, the total is $250,000 qualifying, $225,000 has to be from in-state. So people outside the state, I mean, they have no hooks into our people. And of the 6 state officers, 100% have run on Citizens Election Program money. 100%, all of them. What that gives us, and again, remember, this is from individuals, not corporations, not PACs, not businesses. What it means that all of those people have had to get a lot better acquainted with the state they're going to be representing. they also, the people in the state, and here is one part which I think civic organizations haven't understood yet. In the pockets where people don't vote, they also don't contribute because they think, I don't have money, I mean, that any politician would want. You know, I have nothing. Well, if you have $5 to spare, the politician wants your $5 because they have to get all of this plankton together. I mean, enough plankton, you know, for this whale to keep, you know, doing what it does. Okay. Now, when they have raised the qualifying amount, they tell the State Elections Enforcement Commission, SEEC, it administers this program. They sign a contract that they will not take any other money, that they'll run on CEP money. Not a pledge, a contract. A contract that they'll not take any of the others. The accountability is very strict because the SEEC is a real watchdog. They really look at all of their expenses and so on. Whatever is not used for the election campaign has to be returned. So what happens to the money? It has to be returned. Everything has to be documented. Now, what happens now? By the way, okay, so one of the things that I know you'll be delighted with is that all of this money that is going for elections, this public money, does not come from our taxes. That's right. I got some people, what? Where does it come from? From the sale of abandoned property in the state. And I remember I was talking to the West Haven Rotary Club, and I said from abandoned, and I said, actually, I keep thinking, how much abandoned property do we have that we could always get? And they said, oh, well, there was a banker sitting there, said, well, the abandoned property, unclaimed property, is also in sort of the stocks and bonds and all kinds of financial papers in the banks. And I said, there's always enough. It's get replenished. And he said, you'd be surprised. And so all of a sudden, somebody actually, our son sent us an email yesterday. They said to my husband, do you know that there are 5 or 6 items of abandoned property in your name? And I said, what? So we're going to look into that. But in any case, part of that, where he got this from, I looked it up, and at the moment in Connecticut, there is $746,647,840 and some cents in abandoned property in the state at the moment. Okay? So check, every once in a while in the paper they have a list of abandoned property. Check it. Maybe you have some abandoned property. And my husband and I couldn't think, abandoned property? Well, who knows? Maybe. We have some money coming. I don't know how much, but there it is. There it is. Okay. What is so important about the Citizens Election Program? The Citizens Election Program levels, as I say, levels the playing field. Everybody gets the same amount of money. And now, every once in a while, you'll get some smarty pants who said, I don't want to have my money going to buy bumper stickers and so on. First of all, it's not their money, it's somebody else's money which has been abandoned, so they don't know about CEP. However, the candidates can spend their money on however they wish. And some spend it on bumper stickers because it is a very effective way to get visibility. Another, if a candidate wants, they can sponsor a ballet performance and give out free tickets. It's their choice. So whatever the candidate wants to spend it on. And another thing is this, like I said, people who never, ever would have been able to run for state offices, like the House and the Senate and so on. A number of people have now run who said, I would not have been able to run if not for CEP. Now, like, I'm from the Hamden North Haven League, local league, and many of the leagues we do a breakfast with the legislators, and we have we have Senator Fasano, Senator Looney, and Senator Logan, and representatives, and every single one who represents either New Haven, North Haven, or Hamden, every single one has run on CEP money, and many of the younger ones, including several African Americans, say, I would never have been able to run if it wasn't for CEP money. Okay, so what is very interesting is in 2015, just a few days before the budget proposal, the Democratic Party decided that they were going to suspend CEP. And so it was a couple of days before their budget proposal, and the civic organizations, the League and others, they said, what are you doing? What are you doing? So push back. Okay, so that one. In 2016, the Republican Party decided to kill the CEP. Screams of consternation again. But the League thought to ourselves, they'll be back. They'll be back. And the League decided, okay, what can we do? First of all, we have to raise awareness in our state that we have this gem of a national program. There's no other that complete a program of clean elections in the country. We have a gem of something exceptional. We have to raise awareness. And so we called it Citizens Election Proud, CEP. And so we have a web page, and I'm heading this push to raise awareness. And now I can tell you why I know that I'm telling you something new, because I have been to many very organizations. I've talked at universities. I've talked to the Rotary here, there, and everywhere. And everywhere, there's maybe one or two people who know about CEP. Some said, I think I've heard about it. And the majority, major majority, really doesn't know anything about CEP. And therefore, I think I have reason to believe that for a number of you, this is totally new information. And I am asking you to be part of the effort, This is the third of our 3 years, and after the end of this year, I'll be probably done, So be part of the brigade. Ask your family, your children, your neighbors, your friends, do you know what CEP is? And they'll say, no, or I think I've heard about it. They don't know about it. And so you can, I hope I have enough. I will distribute some information about this, but otherwise the information is on the web. Become part of the awareness raising, please, because most people don't know it. So you know it, and you can spread it a little bit, but get people to invite me to talk. For example, we are asking, if you go on the web, you will see we are asking people to sign on to one sentence. And I'll read you the sentence, and if you wish, some of you can come up and you can sign up for me, and I'll enter you in without you naming you by name. We have now people in 96 towns who have signed on to this one sentence, which says, in fact, don't kill CEP. Not in that word, not in those words. Connecticut has 169 towns, so we have a lot of towns to go, where we still don't have anyone who has signed on to that one sentence. And let's see. Oh, yeah, and please, when you do meet with your legislators, please let them know that in Connecticut, we really want to keep clean elections. We really do, because all over the country, people say, we should have, clean elections, we should get the money out and so on. It's extremely interesting, extremely interesting. When I tell people about CEP, people say, we should have that. I say, we have that. We have that. They said, we should have it on the presidential level, presidential elections. I said, please, let's keep it at least in Connecticut. It's up to us to keep it because we'll lose it. And in fact, we will lose it if we don't persuade our legislators that we want this. We absolutely want this. It is very interesting. You will hear something. They'll say, oh, this has been compromised and so on. They trot out 3 instances. Let me tell you the biggest instance. They say, oh, Governor Malloy tried to undermine it and so on. Every instance where somebody wanted to undermine CEP, the State Elections Enforcement Commission pounced on them. And in fact, this Governor Malloy situation was where before an election, the party, Democratic Party, sent out flyers with federal money. The flyers said, these are the polling places, these are the polling hours, blah, 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 blah. But they used Governor Malloy's picture on the flyer. And SEEC pounced on that because that's using outside information, sort of outside money, say for visibility. And that took about 2 years in the courts. But SEEC prevailed, and the Democratic Party in Connecticut had to pay. They said they gave a voluntary payment. But you can call it whatever, but it was $325,000 for the transgression. This went sort of reverberated across the country because there had never been such a voluntary payment, by a political party. So yes, there have been some attempts, and no, the SEEC has been able to get rid of that. And here is something, and I will end up by mentioning something about the SEEC. They say to restore SCEP. It's not restore CEP. It's restore SEEC, because the SEEC, the State Elections Enforcement Commission, is the administrator of the Citizens Election Program. That SEEC has been, their budget has been cut and cut. I think it's something in the last, I forget, 5 or 6 years, something like 25% of their investigating attorneys have been cut. So that has been cut way down. However, in this latest budget, the SEEC has been told that it must finish all of their whatever, when they found some transgression, they have to finish their investigation within a calendar year. Now, the executive director of SEEC says They can do that with 70% of the complaints they get, but they cannot, but 30% of the complaints are involved. They would never be able to do that in a year. For example, the situation about the flyer with the governor's picture on the flyer and so on, that took them 2 years. And now it's in the law, it's a law. And the law, so if they aren't able to finish the investigation in a year, the culprit goes free, which is totally against common sense. What I'm surprised about is that this bill was proposed by Senator Vazano and Senator Wittges. How can anybody propose that? You know, cut the investigating report, you know, investigating attorneys, and then say, you have to finish the investigation in a year. So that is something that you also should know about. And I will just end up by this one thing. I will read to you that one sentence, which I hope you agree with, and if you agree with it, that you either come and sort of give me a sign on that, or that you go on the web and sign it on the web. And the sentence is the following. The individuals below believe that candidates for the offices of Connecticut Senator, Representative, Governor, Lieutenant Governor, Secretary of the State, Treasurer, Comptroller, and Attorney General, that these should have the choice of funding their election campaigns with grants of public money provided by the Citizens Election Program and administered by the Nonpartisan State Elections Enforcement Commission. So what it says is, these people who are running for offices, for state offices, should have the choice of funding a CEP funding. In other words, translated, it says, don't kill the program. And I do hope that a lot of you come and sign this. Your name will appear nowhere, but we'll enter it on a website where we have a list of all of the towns in which people have signed on to this sentence. And so the town, I don't have it in front of me how many in Brantford have signed already, but I hope that it'll jump. There's going to be a jump in the cipher next to Brantford. So, and I thank you very much for your attention. Ready for questions.
Okay. What is the process? First question, what is the process to apply for the grant money, and are there monetary limits? I think you mentioned that.
To apply for the grant money, it's all on their website. You have, you know, the forms, whatever you have to, it says by when you have to apply, and it's, I don't have it with me.
Which website? Secretary of the State?
No, SEEC, the State Elections Enforcement Commission. On the left, it says Citizens Election Program. You get all of the information. One more thing I wanted to add. The SEEC, by the way, they have a board of 5, and that's sort of 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and I forget what the 5th one. Maybe
Democrat.
Probably, you know, unaffiliated. Don't know. Okay.
Could a fund be created that would allow individuals to support the CEP by contributing money toward the grants?
You can provide donations to the Citizens Election Fund. You can do that, yes. But you see, there is, as I mentioned to you, remember how much money there is in unclaimed property? So we do have the money for that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where did that abandoned property money go before CEP took it?
It goes into the general fund.
Rainy day fund or whatever?
Excuse me?
However.
Okay.
Okay. Participation by candidates in CEP is voluntary, so someone can bypass it. Is there a way to publicize those candidates who bypass?
Yes, yes. As a matter of fact, one of the things I think that we will do on our website, on the CE Proud website, is to list where the money comes from for non-CEP candidates, because definitely among the candidates for governor are some who are not running on CEP money. I think Lamont is not, Ganem is not, because he wanted to run, but he was not allowed because he was an ex-felon and so on. Well, too bad. I think if you've done your time and so on, I think you should be clean. But maybe okay. And there's somebody by the last name of Lumaj who's also not running on CEP. I forget about the others. Yes.
Okay. That's all the questions we have, and we thank you so much for bringing the information.
Well, thank you very much. And those who want information about those who will be part of the brigade, come and pick up information about the CEP. And if you want to come and sign up, I'd love some people to sign up. Remember, this will...
Thank you all for coming, and that ends our program this morning. Bye-bye.
Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at BrantfordTV.org.